The government wants to see the AI models before you do. And the funniest part is they wrote an executive order explaining why that is definitely not a checkpoint. The actual line says this does not create mandatory licensing, preclearance, or a permit requirement, which is government English for relax, bro. We just want up to 30 days with the model before it ships. Like, imagine your landlord saying, I'm not inspecting your apartment. That would be an inspection. I'm just going to come in for up to 30 days before you have people over voluntarily as trusted partners. And that's basically the whole vibe of this thing. It's a checkpoint that has been very carefully labeled, not a checkpoint. Okay, let me back up because I keep seeing people make this about Trump, and that's not really the interesting part. The interesting part is the language. The order asks frontier AI companies, so your OpenAI, your Anthropic, your Google DeepMind, the big ones, to voluntarily give the federal government access to their most powerful models for a period of up to 30 days before public release. And the order right there on the White House site literally walks through this up to 30 days before they plan to release. And then in the same document, it goes out of its way repeatedly to say this is not licensing, not pre-clearance, not a permitting requirement. Pre-clearance, by the way, just means somebody has to approve your thing before you're allowed to release it, like a permission slip. The order is saying this is not that. Wink. The fact sheet calls them trusted partners. Trusted partners getting an early look. Cool, cool, cool. Now, to be fair, and I'm going to be fair here because I'm not in the business of making stuff up, the order does not force anybody to hand over anything. It really is voluntary on paper. Companies can say no. Earlier drafts were reportedly stricter. The final version walked back to, please, would you mind, when you have a sec, letting us peek at the model? As friends, Guardian's write-up gets into how earlier versions had more teeth and the final one quietly lost them. But here's where my eye starts twitching, because we have seen this exact move before in tech many, many times. The voluntary thing, the trusted partner thing, the not regulation. Voluntary in tech is a word that means technically optional, practically required, because the alternative is your competitor said yes and you said no, and now you look like the one with something to hide. Like when payment processors voluntarily started asking platforms to moderate content, nobody passed a law. There was no rule. It was just, suggestions from the people holding the money pipe. Or when app stores voluntarily ask developers to share data about their app before review, not a requirement, just a thing that happens. If you want to ship, voluntary, when one side is the government and the other side is a company that has government contracts and export controls and chip allocations and antitrust attention, is not really voluntary, right? Let's just be adults about this. The thing they're describing is a pipeline. Lab builds the model, government gets a 30-day look, trusted partners get involved, then the public sees it. That's a pipeline with a checkpoint in the middle. Call it whatever you want. Call it a friendship visit, call it a vibe check. The structure is the federal government sees the frontier model before you do. And I'm not even saying that's necessarily bad. There's a real argument that if a model is genuinely dangerous, somebody other than the company shipping it should probably take a look. I get the safety argument, I do. But then call it what it is. If your view is that frontier models need government review before release, then say government review before release. Pass a law, define the rules, define what disqualifies a model, define the appeal. What I do not love, what genuinely makes me tired, is this dance where we build the apparatus of regulation, but we put a sticker on it that says not regulation, so nobody has to vote on it, nobody has to defend it, and nobody can sue over it. Because once the voluntary pipeline exists, the next administration, whoever that is, doesn't have to build it. It's already there. They just have to make it slightly less voluntary. And the administration after that makes it a little less voluntary. And the administration after that just kind of forgets to mention the voluntary part. That's how this stuff works. Nobody ever stands up and goes, today we are creating a federal AI licensing regime. They just build the plumbing, and then 10 years later there's a regime and everyone goes, when did that happen? It happened in the part you weren't supposed to read. And look, the labs are going to do this. They're going to say, yes, of course they are. OpenAI already has government relationships. Anthropic already does safety briefings. Google has, all of Google saying no is not on the menu, which is fine. Maybe it's even good, but let's not pretend we're watching a free market choice. We're watching a polite negotiation between people who already know how it ends. The 30-day window is the part 1D actually watch, because a 30-day government look at a frontier model is not nothing. That's a real engineering ask. What do they get? Weights, API access, a sandbox deployment, red team reports, training data summaries. The order is, let's say, flexible on the specifics, which is also a choice. Because if I'm a lab, the difference between handing over an API key and handing over the actual model weights is, the entire company. Those are not the same gift. And the difference between 30 days of evaluation by a government team that knows what it's doing versus 30 days of paperwork getting routed through some agency is also the entire ball game for whether this is useful safety work or just a delay tax. So the actual question, the one I care about, is not, is this regulation? Obviously, it's regulation shaped. The question is, who's on the receiving end and what do they actually do with the access? Practical takeaway for you, if you're building on these models or you're investing in them or you just use them, assume that the gap between when a lab finishes a model and when you can actually use it just got wider by up to 30 days, officially voluntarily. And assume that the next version of this in some future executive order and some future administration is going to make the voluntary part smaller and the access part bigger. That's the trajectory. Not because anybody's evil, just because that's how checkpoints work. Once they exist, they grow. They don't shrink. Show me the checkpoint that shrunk. I'll wait. So my one tiny ask of everybody who covers this stuff, stop quoting the not regulation line like it's a fact about the world. It's a label on a thing. The thing is what matters. The thing is, the government wants to see frontier models before you do. Everything else is wrapping paper. Anyhow, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.